Prism's been a 7-year push, or I'm losing track of time. Are we going on seven? I guess you came in about 2 years on, and now it's 2025. So
Yeah.
they were in our seventh season, and we've had there was a couple systems, early on that ticketing companies had pumped out, and home bake systems, and some stuff that has popped up along the way. And I think, I think about where Prism was in 2008, and kind of where it is now. And on the surface, to your point, like it shouldn't be so hard. But I think you have been a great testament to like why, like, a very primitive version of Prism just like doesn't, doesn't cut it, and like why we've had to kind of constantly, you know, add more and more and more around like pre-settlement fees and the dynamic ticketing
Oh yeah.
and like what's your perspective on like the complexity of like, what Prism does, and like why something so simple does end up turning into a complex thing, and like how Prism has like uniquely been able to step into that.
Well, I think it's funny you talk about it being, you know, ticketing systems taking a stab at it, that concept, and that makes actually a lot of sense, honestly, because the big piece of it, my concept with the product that we sell is that, on its face, it looks really simple, right?
Yeah.
Ticket, you get in, and maybe a general admission ticket is relatively simple. But when you get into the weeds, especially when you talk about the majority of our business, which is reserve seat ticketing, we're talking about an incredibly complex product, because the fact is that this is basically a 100% custom product for the consumer. That seat in that spot for that show, you
Yeah.
know, with that, whatever, it's like on and on and on. And, um, you know, everything sort of flows from there as far as those levels of complexity, because there's only one of it, And so now we're cataloging all of these different things, starting obviously with the ticketing, but then all the different aspects of how is this deal cut or how is that deal cut. And, like I said, on its surface, it looks really simple, but we get into like you talked about. I mean, dynamic ticketing is a perfect example. It's like, okay, can we do multiple, ticket scales at a different price? Sure. Okay, can we take some tickets that are in one ticket scale and push them into another? Sure. Okay, can we take just a flat number and add it to the gross? Well, is there a ticket attached to it? Well, yes and no,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, so the programmer is like, my head just exploded,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like, that, that same kind of concept applies to all of these little weird idiosyncrasies to our business.
Yeah.
There is a version of the settlement that is for the artist. There's a version of the settlement that understands, what is it internally as a true venue cost. There's another version of the settlement that goes, okay, we've got a partner involved here now, and what should that look like?
Yep.
And every single time we try to handshake and try to build something in, we go, okay, there are little complexities, little idiosyncrasies to each of these. Is it percentage based? Is it per ticket based? Is it attendee based? All those things add up to additional complexities. And, um, y- you know, I think the impulse is to look at it and go, well, it's just an Excel spreadsheet, right? But I always describe something like Prism, in a good way, as being a very rigid environment, right? And, I dealt with this with a tour accountant a couple of weeks ago where it was like, they're saying, well, can we just round this up or just round that out? And it's like, no, we're getting to the bottom of the truth here.
Yeah.
Um, things things you could do on a spreadsheet, but ultimately the benefit here is that you're not leaving yourself open to error. You're not leaving yourself open to what's the next mistake, what's the next mistake, and these kinds of things waterfalling. So that kind of living in that rigid environment, on the one hand, it means, okay, if I want to be, pushing in one direction or another, as far as some of these things that just pop up, I have to think a little bit more hard about how I'm going to address it. But what it does at the end of the day is it forces you to reduce the number of errors, forces you to, you know, push into, you know, the most accurate possible financial settlement. Does that all make sense?
I mean, thank you. You're spelling it out really, really, really well. And there's just thousands of tedious little details.
Yeah.
We've had to build into the product, and you're one of the companies that use it. And I think the higher volume that you do, and the more complex you get into the venues, and the more complex of the setup that you're doing with ticketing, and the more team members you want accessing the system to do specific things, and then it all somehow flows perfectly for the right people at the right time.
Right.
That's kind of what, like, put simply, if you were like, would you want to cheap out on like, would you want to drive with this problem that you have, put ticketing aside, what's your gut reaction to say, like, would you want to use the very built out robust system, or would you feel that it could be solved with something that wasn't as built out as Prism? Yeah.
Well, of course, I mean, that's the old penny wise, pound foolish conversation,
Yeah.
and I think that, if you're and I run into this with, promoters and venues all the time where you say, okay, you kind of have to ask yourself, um, you know, what kind of a business are you?
Yep.
Are you just, you know, scrappy and talented and just like everything else can kind of live in Squishyville? That's cool. Or are you a mature analytical business? And I think, especially in our industry, there's a little bit of an impulse to, move away from that kind of analytical side of things in some cases, because it feels like, okay, we're doing rock and roll here. And I see it with in the old days with our bar, it was this way where it was like, um, you come out and you do these very high profile, exciting things, and you almost forget, like, oh no, there's like, y- you know the best thing you can do at the end of the day is analyze your data. That's really the best thing you can do at the end of the day. It's like putting on the show is incredibly important. Getting out there and having a quality experience for your fan, having a quality experience for, your artist, those are all, um, you know tent poles to what we do. But if we weren't analyzing it at the end of the day, um, it's all, you're putting the sustainability of that in real jeopardy. And, you look at Prism. I mean, to me, one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle is the reporting, for us. And so, I'm doing, in addition to where we come up with our, monthly P&L and all that kind of stuff that's, devised by our accounting department, we're looking at it going, okay, what's the other data we can pull out of this? Number one, how does it match to the information we're seeing systematically generated through our accounting system? How does it feed into that? What are we doing to save time? What are we doing to save mistakes? And, with the volume of business that we're doing, I hate to think, going back 10 years, how many mistakes did we make, from a financial standpoint, that were just done because it's sitting on a spreadsheet on somebody's computer that wasn't accessible in that moment, or it was something that was recorded by somebody and just got lost in the shuffle. When you look at the reporting, I mean, I'm able to dive in now and go, okay, who are my top agents? What are my top genres? What are the top agencies? What are the top promoters that we work with? And so, from a strategy standpoint for us, that tells us directionally where we're going to go in ways that were way harder to access, pre prison, where we would be saying, okay, like, we have kind of these gut feelings about things. And gathering that data because it's all dispersed in other places or it's sitting, local to somebody's hard drive or one thing or another would be incredibly difficult to do. Now I can look at, um, data and I can make forecasting decisions that, frankly are every single day making the company more sustainable.